Right, so I am trying to record this, so and I'm happy to have questions, but at the end. Okay, just because the biggest challenge I'm going to have is I have a lot of stuff that I'm looking forward to sharing with everybody, and as you could tell, I just kept adding stuff, and this is actually after I took away a lot of stuff, right? So, so I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, and also this is just information, right? So there's no, I don't have any products to sell. I don't have, there's nobody paid to be here. This is, I'm just doing it because it's important, right? Our nutrition, our health is the most important thing that we have. That being said, there's a couple of new faces in the crowd, and I just want to say for you that the most important thing is having a properly functioning nervous system. So a spine is well-aligned, balanced, strong, and a nervous system that is able to communicate freely throughout the body. That can take junk food and turn it into tissue at the back of your eyeball that can see. So that that's that mechanism that the body has is pretty amazing. We want to talk about better food and better fuel today, and how we can maximize that. But certainly, if you're here and you haven't been to a chiropractor, you've never had your spine checked, definitely, or if it's been a while, you should consider it, right? So we get our eyes checked, our ears checked, our teeth checked, everything checked. But if you don't have somebody checking the part that connects it all together, then you're missing a major aspect of it. So, and it's funny because this is, whenever we do nutrition, it's very popular. There's a lot of you here right now, versus, for me to get a chance to talk about chiropractic for whatever reason, I have to actually buy you dinner, like we do a dinner talk a couple of times. And so there's no food here today. We're going to talk about food, but we're not going to eat any. So speaking of eating, right, if there's something that you could eat that would improve insulin sensitivity, decrease inflammation, right? How huge is that? Decrease inflammation, right? Who would like to decrease inflammation? And you should. Everybody should. Support metabolism, support thyroid function, balance your hormones, increase human growth hormone and muscle strength, increase testosterone and fertility in men and women, improve PMS and menopause, improve brain function, mood, decrease depression, make stronger bones, lower blood triglycerides, raise your HDLs, reduce stroke risk, heart disease, cancer, stronger immune system, improve your skin and your eyes. Would you want to know what that was? Would you want to eat more of that in your diet, right? Would that make sense? All right. Conversely, if we had something that caused food cravings, made you want to eat all the time, made you hungry all the time, made you hangry, right? I know about hangry. That's the people that work for me here. But it's been, I changed. I'm not hangry anymore. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, suppresses immune function, feeds yeast, accelerates the aging process by creating inflammation, decreasing the elasticity of organs, blood vessels, tooth decay, behavioral and cognition changes detrimentally, right? Elevates stress hormones, depleting the body of important nutrients, right? This would be something we want to avoid, yes? All right, so you guys are all kind of right ahead on me. Does anybody want to take a guess what the first one was, the good example? What am I going to tell you to eat more of?
Veggies?
That's a good guess, right? And that's probably a lot of people are thinking that, and you're right to say it. No, it's not the answer. Fats, yeah, saturated fats, right? And everybody shudders a little bit. So, like, I kind of have to make a case right now, right? Because there's been a lot of pressure, a lot of vilification of saturated fats. And so, I'm the weirdo if I'm telling you to eat more of them, right? So I have to make a case as to why. And then what about the second thing? What do we think that is? The bad thing. You're right. You said sugar, right? So, or we could say sugar, or just more generally, we could say carbohydrates, right? So I want to start there because, there's a lot here, but I'm going to spend most of the time on that. And, as far as like a lot of the other details and making the case, I gave you my notes. We won't have time to be reasonable and hit everything that's in here, but certainly, you can have this now. I gave you all the references. I'm going to share with you, different books and resources. I have people, we made a list at the end of resources. We have a couple of people that if your interest is piqued and you feel like you need somebody to kind of hold your hand as you make changes, We've got a couple people there, so we'll talk about that at the end. But again, it's today I want to kind of make that case because it is a bold statement, I guess you could say, to tell people to eat more saturated fat, right, and the other one carbohydrates. So let's start with what does that mean? So does everybody know if I say macronutrients? We have carbohydrates, protein, and fat, right? Does that make sense, everybody? So who would give me some examples of carbohydrates? Spaghetti, so pasta, right? What else? Bread. What else? Cake. Potatoes is an example. Vegetables is an example, right? So, and I'm not trying to say that all carbohydrates are bad, but do we know what they all have in common? Carbohydrates. What do they turn into as we digest them? They turn into sugar, right? So when I'm talking, we're going to use the terms sugar, glucose, which is what they call blood sugar, basically, and carbohydrate. Like you'll hear me use those things interchangeably. So just understand that if I'm talking about blood sugar, I'm talking about sugar. I'm talking about like it was a carbohydrate that got broken down into sugar. Does that make sense? So I'm not talking about table sugar. Okay, everybody understand what I'm saying? So don't let that throw you off. It's not only about sugar itself. There's a lot of things that break down in sugar. So and basically any carbohydrate. Also protein. Who can give me some examples of protein? Beef. Beef is a good example.
Nuts.
There's protein in nuts, yeah.
Dairy
Fish,
products.
dairy, right? So everybody has. I feel confident at this point. People kind of have an understanding when I talk about protein and carbohydrates and fats. Carbohydrates and protein. Actually, protein can also be broken down to glucose. So the only thing that can't be broken down to glucose is dietary fat. It's the only thing. And so what I'm sharing with you now, like I went to. When I was in chiropractic school, a lot of people don't realize, first of all, chiropractors get more nutrition in school than pretty much anybody. Maybe nutritionists I'm sure they get more, but my argument would be is a lot of what they're doing, a lot of what dietitians or mainstream nutritionists doing is kind of what got us into trouble in the first place as far as the obesity epidemic and everybody being sick because they talk about calorie counting and things like that, and we're going to talk about why that's not sustainable and that's ineffective, right? So protein, carbohydrate both break down into glucose, right? So if this is supposed to be a gas can and this is some fuel here, this is a cell, okay? So the cells in our body need to have fuel, and as long as there's carbohydrates on board, your body will respond to that by releasing insulin. Insulin is a hormone created by the pancreas. It's there to deal with sugar, and it's a very fine system in that we can only have at any given moment, if you drain all the blood out of the body and siphon out the sugar, there's about a tablespoon in an average adult. Right, so you think about how much volume of blood is in us, and a tablespoon of sugar is not very much. And so the body is the job of the pancreas and insulin is to maintain that balance in blood supply, because if you get too much, it's highly toxic and kill you. And if you don't have enough, everybody kind of knows what that feels like, right? Like you feel out of it. If you're an athlete, like anybody that's ever trained for a marathon or done anything like that, you might have heard the term bonking. Have you ever heard of bonking? It's not what you might be thinking. It's what you call it when you actually deplete all of the stored glycogen in your body. So when you take in all the sugar, so I said a tablespoon of sugar, right? If you drink a soda, that has probably, I think it's like 14, 15, 16 tablespoons of sugar in it. Like it's a lot of sugar. And so now you secrete all this insulin, and it does what it can to maintain that level. So it's taking that extra glucose and it's storing it as muscle glycogen, which is there for if you are to be fuel. It's there to be stored, but also it stores the rest as body fat. So the problem is, as long as you have insulin in your system, as long as you're have carbohydrates in your system and you have to respond with the insulin, you can only store fat. You can't burn fat. All right? So what I tell you is the only thing that doesn't raise your insulin when you eat it? Fat, right? So if you follow what I'm saying, what do they tell us to do for years and years and years? Low fat and high what? Well, high protein, but also high carbs, right? Like the base of the food pyramid, right, is grain. Remember the food pyramid? They replaced it in 2011 with something called My Plate. My Plate, they don't even mention fat, but they kind of they laid off the grains a little bit with My Plate, but basically the old food pyramid was like the base was carbs, and then grain in particular, so bread, pasta, cereal, that grain. And then they said the very little tip of the top of the pyramid was fats. And they said use sparingly, fats and oils. So they should have flipped it upside down and used it the other way. And so that they came out with that food pyramid in the 70s. And so when a lot of us when I was a kid in the 70s, I think that's what we learned in school and health class and everything else. Well, now people that were the kids in the 70s are middle-aged now, and everybody's struggling with their weight, right? So it's like it was just enough time to fatten us up for the last 30, 40 years. And so that's basically what's happening. And so in addition to the problem of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, right? So the most effective diet should lower the leading causes of death in the United States, the cancer, the heart disease. Diabetes is a big problem. Now they're having kids that are being diagnosed with adult onset diabetes as children, right? So things are way out of whack in that respect. So when it comes to the fuel choice, you have to go with what's going to moderate your insulin, because if not, you can't burn fat. You can't ever tap into that stored body fat, right? So think to yourself, if you ever, you make that New Year's resolution. So come January, the gym down here is packed, right? For like 2 weeks, and then and they sell right at the front of the gym, like right in front of the treadmills where everybody's running like a gerbil on a treadmill, right? They sell big coolers full of sports drinks, right? Which are loaded with what? Sugar. Yeah. So they're all they're fueling that run. So they're running like a hamster on a wheel, drinking Gatorade and other sports drinks and stuff. And so what are they not burning? Yeah, it's terrible, right? So so you can't out-exercise a bad diet. You can't burn body fat for fuel as long as insulin is elevated. Insulin is elevated every time you consume carbohydrates. And then decrease portions or decreasing your calories while increasing your exercise is not sustainable. It is not physically possible. You can only do it for a short time. People do it for a short time, they drop a little weight, and then the body says, and they find they can't sustain it. They end up eating. As soon as they start eating again, they blow right back up, and it's because they're not paying attention to whatever they're eating is doing to their insulin level. So the insulin is the big thing as far as what I want you to take away from today is you have to understand how that works, right? Because if you're trying to not feel hungry all the time, there's only two ways you could satiate that hunger. One is you could just eat whatever you want and eat till it hurts, right? Till you're busting, or you could eat a meal that's high in fat and low in carb. And does everybody have that experience where you feel full longer when you've had something something substantial, bacon and eggs or something like that? Sticks with you a lot longer than a bowl of breakfast cereal, right? Everybody's experienced that. So that's what I'm talking about. So if you want to now, in terms of make this a lifestyle, if somebody's actually trying to lose weight, increase their performance athletically, if they're trying to combat any number of chronic illnesses that plague everyone, that you have to get the cell to remember what it's like to use the good stuff, the good fuel, because we were all wired to live on it. Like so I mentioned, in college and in biochemistry class and in nutrition and all the things that we learned, what they talked about, we learned about how these different macronutrients are metabolized, and they referred to fat as the king of fuels back then. But at the time, this is 19 years ago, was like right smack dab in the low-fat movement, and so I remember back then being in class and thinking about how that doesn't quite calculate, and only recently has this become a thing, like the different diets that people hear about, and I'll touch on a little bit because a lot of people are confused about that, but the paleo diet, the Atkins diet, the primal diet, the ancestral diet, what they all have in common is that insulin factor that I'm talking about, and also they refer to it as paleo, for example, because the idea of where I was going is that we have in our cells, in our bodies, that memory of living on meat and vegetation, right? Because that's all there was. If it wasn't growing or running, it wasn't food. You weren't gonna. There was no box of Wheaties, right? There was no. I mean, they do say that they think Paleolithic people, they did do some grinding of grain and harvesting of grain because they ground it up and made stuff out of it. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. That's not the point. The point is that in all of us, the mechanism hasn't changed. The wiring hasn't changed. It's there, and it's just a matter of remembering it. So it takes a minimum of 21 days to get the body to remember, right? So meaning if we're switching from, if you want to think of the glucose as kind of like, I don't know, say you've got a nice, you got a furnace and you're trying to stay warm, right? And you could put different things in that furnace. The glucose is kind of like throwing some gasoline into that furnace, right? It flares up, it's dramatic, and then it crashes, right? It goes out. Whereas the fat would be more like coal and wood, something that's going to burn for a while, right? So, but when fat is metabolized, when it burns, the byproduct of that is called ketones, and it's the ketones that become fuel for our cells, our brain cells, and every other cell in our body. So this is called being in ketosis when this happens. So being in ketosis means you're running off ketones, which means it's either that you're digesting fat that you ate, or you're metabolizing your own body fat to use for fuel. And you can't be in ketosis if insulin's elevated. That turns it off, switches you back to glucose. Like it'll always go for that, gasoline, that jet fuel, preferentially over the fat. But it takes 21 days for your cells to remember. So because everybody here, unless you've already been doing some of this stuff, is a sugar burner. And it sounds like a derogatory term, but it's just true. Because if you've got any carbs in your diet, that's what your body's using. And, you're hungry when you wake up in the morning, and until you get something in you, you don't feel quite right. And then, around mid-morning, you kind of start to crash again, and then you got to have something, because that's how sugar burning works. If you were accessing body fat, you wouldn't feel weak and tired and hungry. And usually you think about, the caveman and, his meal, he wasn't getting 3 squares a day, or some people recommend you eat 6 meals a day to keep your metabolism going and everything. The cavemen certainly weren't getting that. If they killed something and ate it, like they had to be good for a while. They didn't miss a meal. They might have missed a day or two, right? And so you think about last time you were really feeling out of it, like really feeling loopy and hangry. Somebody, your buddies showed up with their spears and said, "Come on, we're going hunting." That would be the last thing that you'd be in the mood to do, because it's a very strenuous activity. And so, that is why we developed that. That's why our bodies are made to be like that, so that we could, do that. And it's in every one of us, but you need to starve those cells for 21 days. They developed a new hardware. Starving of glucose, not in general, to process it. So that is a little, people have kind of a hard time with that, The other thing that changes your flora. We have more bacteria in our gut than we do human cells in our whole body. So it's kind of crazy when you think about that. And if you've ever gone on a diet and then you have uncontrollable cravings for cookies and cake and pizza and whatever, not all of it is you. Some of it is actually those little creatures riding around in there, right? So it's kind of crazy to think about. It's like being under alien control a little bit. But they secrete enzymes or whatever they secrete that somehow your body it communicates with and makes you say, I need to have that cake right now. And so they need to die off too. And literally, as you go through this, people will feel kind of like they have the flu because their flora is some's dying off and being replaced slowly with others, and their cells are craving that glucose. Some people, it's not uncommon that you actually get a little bit of bad breath while you're going through that, and it's because there's bacteria dying in there and it comes out. So people notice the difference in their bathroom, everything. So, but that if you could do that for 21 days, that is what it takes. You start to actually burn fat as fuel, and then you feel really good. Inflammation comes down. We've gotten the notes there about your cholesterol will actually come down. Your triglycerides will come down. Your HDL, the good fats in the blood, will actually go up. There's pretty amazing things that happen that are counterintuitive because we've learned that we need to have this low fat this and low fat that, and it's just bad. It's bad news. So I mentioned about the different kind of diets. Everybody's heard of the Atkins, and he was not the first by far, but he was kind of the first to be widely recognizable. And now a lot of people they but did he die? Did he die from his own diet? Right? That's what people say, and it's not true. He fell and hit his head, and he had internal bleeding, and he was in a hospital for a while, and he died relative to his injuries. It had nothing to do with his. I think it may have been heart failure or organ failure of some kind, but it wasn't related to cardiovascular disease. It was because he was had a horrible head trauma. But the thing with Atkins, I think they were less selective about what you ate. It was just fat was good, carbs were bad, and they started you on no carbs, and then they gradually introduced some vegetables or whatever. But people would be eating a block of cheese and a pepperoni stick and things like that, and so not necessarily the best choice, right? And so paleo is a lot more. It is the modern thing, and so when people have been asking me what I've been doing because I just lost over 20 pounds, I said, well, it's kind of like paleo, and I don't like to label it though, because I don't know if I'm doing it exactly like paleo, but that's my favorite cookbook happens to be a paleo cookbook. I'll share it with you here, but they're a lot more conscientious about the quality of the food that you're ingesting, right? Meaning that it shouldn't be processed. It should be preferably, if it's animal related, it should be from a grass-fed animal. Organic does not mean grass-fed, by the way. There's a difference. And then there's another version called the Primal Blueprint. The really good reference. This guy, Mark Sisson, his name is in your notes. He's got a website called marksdailyapple.com. It's a daily blog. You subscribe to it. And the nice thing about it is he writes an article every day, and so you can learn a lot. Just if you're interested, you can read more. He emails you an article almost every day. But then, if you go on the blog page, they say if you're new to this, start here, and he tells you everything. He has books for sale. You can buy his books, but you don't need to because everything you actually need to know is there if you're willing to look for it a little bit. And it's also, and he has some different kind of food products and things like that for sale and some resources like that. But there's a search engine. So if you're trying to do this and you say, well, what if I eat this? Then then about. He doesn't just tell you yes or no. A blog article comes up and there'll be a whole article about it. And you can learn why it might be a good idea or why it might not be. Right. So that's a really good resource. And then the other thing you might hear is called ketogenic diet, which I taught you what the term ketogenic is. That's what we're talking about in terms of you need to get in that below 50 grams a day of carbohydrate for 21 days in order to get the body to upregulate to fat burning again. That's called being ketogenic. So don't confuse that with ketoacidosis. That's a whole other thing where it can happen to diabetics. It's a very bad, life-threatening situation. Being ketogenic or ketosis is not a bad thing at all. That's just the name for the fat burning. That in the ketogenic diet, they would maintain that super low carbohydrate level indefinitely. So it's a hard window to stay in, and all these diets are ketogenic to an extent, but not necessarily intentionally. It's just a matter of how much you want to take it there. So after those first 21 days, if you have not, or if you've lost some weight or whatever, and you're happy with that, you could up the carbohydrates a little bit, 100 to 150 grams a day, but so you wouldn't technically be ketogenic, but you'd be kind of hovering in and out of it, so your body would be able to burn fat as fuel as it needed to. That makes sense. We're going to take questions at the end, sir.
At the end, I got here late, that's what I was going to say.
That's okay.
Thank you.
So the next thing you'll see on here is Weston Price diet, and the cool thing, I could not mention the Weston Price, and I'm going to pass some of these books around. This guy, Weston Price, was a dentist in the 1930s, right? And he had written some books on dental pathology. And then he had the bright idea, he said, well, if instead of studying the diseases, what if we studied the people that were healthy and learned what they're doing different than the rest of us, right? And so he traveled the world in the 1930s and was able to find back then people that were still eating the way their ancestors had eaten, right? So he lived with different tribes and mountain people and people in Europe, people in Africa, people in Asia, and studied their diet. And he also studied what happened when people in the village would go off to the city to work and adopt a more Western diet. And so a couple of big things he found. He was a proponent of fats from way back then, and against processed food from way back then. And he was also he knew that what the animals ate made a difference about the quality of the fat, the protein, the milk products, whatever you were getting from that animal was dependent on what they ate. And he said that, and this is not, he didn't make that up. He learned it from the ancient people. He learned about, these people in the Swiss Alps that would take their cows, as the snow receded in the spring, they'd take the cows right along the snow line because that's where the freshest, shoots were coming up, and that the cows would have the best milk when they ate there. And also, a lot of these primitive people, they knew about what would happen in terms of making new people, right? So they would, when a young couple was to be married, so before their marriage, they would give all the choicest organ meats and fats and all the good stuff to them pre-conception, because they knew they were about to make some of that, so they should have it, right? And so that was they knew about the importance of that. And so now you think about that wisdom, you think about today, and we've been on this low fat thing for now, a couple of generations really, and you think about how right now there's a tremendous epidemic, if you will, I guess, of cognitive issues as people age, right? So early onset dementia is a really, really big problem right now, and our brain is made out of fat and cholesterol, right? We need that for the brain to function properly, for the electrical charges, for the synapses to happen. You need to have fat and cholesterol, and they've been giving us drugs to lower it and telling people to avoid it, and so now the older people that are getting up in their 60s and 70s, which is too young for dementia, right? But we're seeing it a lot more than ever, and as well as other neurologic diseases of all kinds. But then also think about children right now, and more common than it's ever been is you have attention deficit issues. You've got the autism spectrum, which covers, you know, a lot, right? I mean, I think it's something like 1 in 30 or 40 boys in America is on the autism spectrum in some way, right? It's not better diagnosis. I mean, there might be some of that, right? Some of that number might be inflated by that. But, you know, how do we know it's not better diagnosis? Well, it's because we're all the 40-year-old severely autistic people walking around, right? I mean, there just aren't that many, right? And so, whereas today, you know, it's hard to, you know, in any group of kids, you're going to find something. It's very, very common. So, so you think about, you know, if you know, so people my age having kids our parents were on a low-fat diet from, like, you know, and a lot of processed food through their whole childhood, whereas my grandparents, like their parents, you know, they ate eggs and bacon and all kinds of stuff for breakfast all the time, and then, you know, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, adopted more processed foods and convenience foods and all that, and now they're getting, you know, the older people are feeling the effects in terms of that, but then, you know, their kids and then you know, me and my kids, and, you know, so the kids that are coming on now are the ones that are really suffering, because that's several generations of processed food, and you know, the grandparents got that foundation when they were young, but the rest of us didn't. We didn't get you, and the most important time to get the fats in your diet is when your brain is first developing. All right, so at any rate, I'm going to pass this around. I marked a couple pages in here. So look at these. I mean, you can look whatever you want, but check out the pages I marked, because they'll show people that are actually oftentimes related to each other from the same village. And he was a dentist, right? So he was counting cavities, and he was finding people they'd never seen a dentist before, but, you know, out of 1,000 teeth he would examine, you'd be lucky to find one cavity, versus somebody on a Western diet had a mouthful of them, right? And so he showed what they look like when they're on that diet, and then the people like the same age who adopted a Western diet and had horrible teeth, and then one generation, those people's children would have crowded teeth. They need orthodontia, whereas nobody had ever needed orthodontia before. They had big, you know, plenty of room for all their teeth and big, shiny, healthy teeth. So have a look at that and pass it around. It's a lot of fun. And then also, this is the Weston Price Foundation. This is their cookbook. And so while they aren't necessarily looking at the insulin thing the way I described it, so like this might not, if you're looking as far as like weight loss or something like that, this wouldn't be as quick. But as far as a long-term diet, this is very, very healthy. So it's basically all about not eating processed food, and they're into a lot of lacto-fermentation, so fermented foods, but the traditional way. So it's living food, and so it's really good as far as your the gut biome, as far as, you know, the keeping everything healthy in there. So you want to pass that around. These two books. This is Primal Blueprint. This is Mark Sisson. These are a couple of his books. This is the one that actually got me started on this. Was you know, I wanted to run and bike faster, and so I read this book. And then this is a good cookbook. And then the one, my two favorite books for last. This is the one that really made it easy. Like, as far as cookbooks go,